Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
This is your captain speaking, John Reagan. I'm sitting in for Vincent. He called me about 10 days ago saying, "Hey, John," which is code for, how would you like to host? Being a farmer, he's got things that have to get done, and I'm happy to step in and take care of things for him. I want to remind you, if you're looking to buy some election insurance, the RK gun shows are going to be this weekend, and you can find this list at rkshows.com. So for November 5th, they have 6 shows going on: Little Rock, Oklahoma City, Somerset, Kentucky, Marietta, Georgia, Kingsport, Tennessee, and in my old stomping grounds of Lebanon, Missouri. A couple of things I saw, with today being Halloween. I thought it was interesting that Saturday, October 29th, was the 47th anniversary of what may be, in retrospect, one of the most historic events in the downfall of human civilization. That's when the internet had its first host-to-host connection made. And this was between UCLA and Stanford Research. Like I say, the rest is history. Well, our guest today, Anthony Patch, I first heard him on Hagman and Hagman, and then recently I was at the Hear the Watchman conference in Knoxville, and just so happened my next door table guest was Anthony Patch. And I guess you'd say neither one of us really expected to be where we are now. He had a career as a paramedic out of Oakland, California. We've both been researchers and covered different areas, many of which overlap. It's really fun having a conversation with him. And it seems like, here on USA Prepares, we've talked about quantum computers, we've talked about CERN, but we really didn't talk about the two together so much as Anthony does. And it seems like when you get those two together, it's not a subject that those that are in power in this world want to see get out. So I guess at this point I'll just say welcome to USA Prepares, Anthony Patch.
Well, thank you, Captain Reagan. It's great to be on board with you this morning.
What we're going to do is we're not going to take calls today because Anthony has just way too much to get to in the short amount of time we have. So however you want to structure this to get the best use out of the time, be my guest.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the venue and the opportunity. Yeah, it was great meeting you back in Knoxville, and we had some interesting turn of events take place during the first presentation. I'm glad that we got a chance to face-to-face and share some notes.
And I'm still planning on making a video with my Legos, which is something I did at the USA Prepares meetup way back when I was living in Springfield. Just as an example to try to get a feel for large numbers, because our minds really can't handle that. In fact, once you get above 5 or 6, your brain can't even pick things out without stopping and counting. And the numbers, I did this in response to the 512 D-Wave computer that Google and NASA bought.
Yeah.
And you start putting these together and you get a stack of Legos, for trillions, which still isn't all that big. And then about the largest number I could find was the number of atoms in the universe. And even at that, the number you can come up with the 512, whether it's bit or qubit computer, is just astronomical.
It is. You're referring to Gordy Rose, one of the co-founders of D-Wave, who cited with their Model 512 that they were accessing somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions. This is an interdimensional quantum computer in which they're extracting, as he says, resources from parallel dimensions. And just so you know, I try to make my responses very succinct because I like to have a conversation rather than a presentation. Okay?
Okay.
All righty. So, did you have something to add to that? Because I don't want to, take up the whole floor.
No, it's just, my undergraduate degree is computer science. So when I started trying to understand what quantum computers were, the thing that disturbed me is their comments of, they don't even understand how they work. And then the other comment that they made is when they put the problem in the computer, they say it's like shipping it off to an alternative dimension and the answer comes back.
Yes, it's really bizarre when you think in terms of transistor gate model, linear processor, computer systems that we're comfortable with that operate within our reality, within our domain or our dimension. This is an openly avowed by D-Wave. This isn't supposition on my part. They are actually proud of the fact that it operates interdimensionally and that it takes what they call, they refer to as combinatorial programs. And those are essentially what they believe to be all of the probable solutions to a problem. And simultaneously, they will submit in a combinatorial fashion all of these solutions at one time into another dimension or multiple dimensions. And we're talking about quantum scale. So when we talk about dimensions, we're talking about quantum measurements and that quasi-realistic world in which classical physics, the laws of which really don't apply. So it gets kind of murky when we start talking about this and when they, even as you stated, are not real sure what's going on in terms of processing.
It's like in a similar field, artificial intelligence, they make the same comment. They don't really understand exactly how it works. And
yeah, isn't that interesting? I think lately you and I probably have crossed the similar research paths on AI because D-Wave definitely, this applies, and we'll get into some other numbers today, does apply to the advancement of artificial intelligence. But yes, they make somewhat similar statements in that once they put together the basic algorithms to start the process of machine learning and then progressing into deep learning, at that deep learning process, the algorithms become self-teaching. And as a self-taught organism, if you will, they're really not sure what's going on. It appears to me that they are producing their own algorithms as a form of consciousness, if you will, at the quantum scale, because these are quantum computers that we're talking about when we speak of AI.
And it's again, with my computer background, it's mind-blowing some of the things that they do. Because back when I started, it's the mainframe computers. In fact, when I started my computer science degree, it was purely punch cards, having to submit a deck and waiting for a printout to come back. Not even the joy of having a computer terminal. And to go from there to where we are now, it's really difficult to explain without getting extremely technical.
Sure.
And the just the sheer capacity of what's going on out there is it's tough to talk about. And in fact, even though I was in the the business world, I had an opportunity to go interview for an Oracle DBA position at Compaq when I was living in Houston. And they gave me a tour of the room. And, I'd been used to, like I say, the mainframe days just a few years earlier. And this was actually, I guess, less than, say roughly 10 years after I left the Air Force. And the number of computers they had at that time running these databases was just mind-blowing, because I was used to, just understanding the personality of the computers, which was part of my job, understanding performance of the computers. And that might sound a little strange, but you experience the same thing. You buy a car and you learn the personality of the car. And even if you have the same make and model, they have different personalities. But the personality of the computers today is something totally different.
Well, given that this is Halloween, I hope you're not speaking of the ghost in the machine.
No, I wasn't.
It is true. I mean, that's a term that goes way back. I'm 63 years old, so you and I have kind of walked the same timeline, I would assume. I remember the punch cards and the punch card sorters, and having to wait until usually 2 or 3 in the morning to get computer time at UC Berkeley for any rudimentary computer science that I was doing.
Hold that thought. This is John Reagan with Anthony Patch. We'll be back after this break. So, at the Pentagon from the fall of 85 through early 88, working on the nuclear planning system. And during that time, I had an opportunity to see Admiral Grace Hopper, who is, one of the, pioneers in computers. And I may even still have my packet of picoseconds. And what those are is, it's a package of ground pepper. And just to explain things, a picosecond is 1/1 trillionth of a second. It's a very small amount of time, and to try and get it to something that again, humans can understand. If a picosecond were 1 second, then that's the same ratio as would be to 1 second being compared to 31,710 years. And the distance, at the speed of light, the distance light travels in a picosecond is about the size of that grain of pepper. So she hands out packets of picoseconds, at least up until
that is fascinating. Yeah, it's hard to wrap our head around the numbers, and we're going to run around a few more numbers here this morning in terms of artificial intelligence and how it compares to the neurons in our brains. There's a one-to-one correspondence that I would like to share with you, and a number that I did not share at Knoxville that I'll present to you this morning that relates back to D-Wave.
Well, go ahead.
Okay. You have access to a computer. I'm out doing a remote on my cell phone. If you would do me a favor, John, and run 2 to the 13th power for me. The reason I'm doing that is, as background, D-Wave's model numbers, you mentioned the 512 model, that was released in February of 2015. In September of 2013. Yeah, 2013. And then the 1024 model in February of last year. Those are the number of qubits. Now, qubits are quantum bits. Qubits are representative, if you will, or analogous to transistors in terms of how many are in a given computer. But qubits, they cite as their model numbers, the model 512 or the 1024. The reason I ask you to run 2 to the 13th power is they progress their model numbers by a power of 2. Moore's law says that transistors double every 18 months in a classic computer. In a quantum computer, they use what is known as Rose's law at D-Wave, euphemistically because of Gordy Rose being one of the founders. And they say that under Rose's law, qubits double every 12 months. Now, back in 2013, Gordy Rose made a public presentation in which he said they've moved from doubling every 12 months to doubling every 3 months. So utilizing that as a time frame for extrapolating the progression by a power of 2 of the number of qubits and therefore the model numbers, the number that I'm presenting right now is 65,536 qubits. And that's a very significant number because it correlates to our human brain. So do you have, by chance, a total for 2 to the 13th power?
Yes, 2 to the 13th is 8,192.
Okay. So if we go to the next, which would be 2 to the 14th, we should be at 65,536.
That'd be 16,000.
Okay. All righty. So what we're looking at here, I'm trying to run the numbers here off the top of my head, but let's just get to the chase. The basic idea here is that in progressing through the model numbers, which started at 128, and then 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 8196, and so forth and so on with the power of progression, we arrive at a number of 65,536, and not to make people's eyes, glaze over here with all these numbers, but that is also corresponds to the exact number of what are known as Cubulin dimmers. That's with one M. Cubulin dimmers. Cubulin.
Hold that thought. We'll be back after this break. This is John Reagan with Anthony Patch. And while we were away at the break, I pulled up a spreadsheet and got exponents of 2. And the largest that the spreadsheet will go is up to 2 to the 112th before it. I can't display them anymore with the comma separation. It has to go to scientific notation. So 65,536 is what you get at 2 to the 16th power.
2 to the 16th. Thank you, my friend. But, it's really debilitating to be without a computer. Here we are talking about them. I'm in my car doing a remote, so I apologize. But I want to make it relevant for folks real quickly, and that is that the model number that I am presenting as 65,536 qubits for D-Wave Corporation is a number that I came up with. It is not a public number. It doesn't mean it's secret. I'm making the conjecture, the supposition, that they have already reached this level in terms of the advancement of the number of qubits, not only because they were advancing every 3 months by doubling, but by their own statement their advancement in the number of qubits was going to accelerate even beyond the doubling factor. So the other component to that is to look at the proof in terms of its application. What would it be used for? And that's where we move into the discussion of AI. And AI trying to mimic the human brain. Therefore, you build a computer that has the same number of components as the human brain. And without getting too far into the weeds, we have, of course, neurons in our brain. We have 10 to the 11th power of neurons. But within the neurons, we have tubulin dimmers that are contained within microtubules. We have 10 to the 18th microtubules in each neuron. And therefore, what we're talking about when we go to 65,000 is the number of tubulin dimmers. Each dimmer has the equivalent processing power in a binary fashion to one tubulin dimmer to one qubit. There's a one-to-one correspondence. So the progression of the model numbers is deliberate in its mimicking of the human brain in terms of how the brain processes quantum information. We have a biological quantum computer between our ears, and their goal is to mimic our brain structurally and then hopefully to achieve consciousness with that quantum computer.
And it's the goal of the tech elite to upload themselves and achieve immortality.
That is correct. And as you know, my background is Christian, and I believe that this is the system that will build the beast system and will actually be the artificial mind of the image of the beast. And this also moves into the discussion of Mark of the Beast. But what I'd like to do is say, okay, you've got a computer that is mimicking the human brain structurally, and their goal is to achieve consciousness and sentient state with it. What are they going to apply it to? Well, that's where we start talking about the Sentient World Simulation, SWS. Presented it as a white paper in 2006 from Purdue University and implemented and activated and went live in 2007. And you heard me touch on this a little bit in Knoxville, that this is what it's applied to. It's a mirror image of the entire world and its inhabitants. Gordy Rose in 2013 said the Model 512 had the equivalent processing power of 7 billion human brains. That was in 2013. We're now talking about a computer that goes from 500 qubits to 65,000. That's also the number of parallel dimensions, 2 to the 65,000th power of parallel dimensions that it's accessing.
And it gets difficult just trying to relate that with anything in our normal lives.
Yeah, it really is, and therefore we just call it infinity to make it easier, that it's operating in infinite parallel dimensions. And, you know, in science, we want to talk about, well, there's only 11, or there might be as many as 56 dimensions. It really becomes irrelevant. You have to look at the functionality. What is it? What's the tool being applied to? And in this sentient world simulation, the over 7 billion humans alive on this planet are represented in this digital simulation. Call it a matrix, if you will. They're represented as nodes, and each node is given an avatar. So in real time, since 2007, using quantum computers, everyone on the planet already is being monitored, whether it's through Wi-Fi connections or satellite detection of our resonant frequency of our DNA. I mean, pick your poison. But the point is we are all being monitored, and this is not paranoia. This is actual data coming out of their own white papers, their own publications. So it's not something that I make up. You can Google this information and find it very readily.
We have Dr. Richard Allen Miller on USA Prepares every Thursday, He was the lead physicist for the U.S. Navy before my time of being in the military. And we got to the discussion on artificial intelligence this past Thursday. And from his contacts, they say that at least one of the artificial intelligence has gone rogue and is no longer under control of its human handlers.
Wonderful.
Do you know anything about that? Or
That's getting a little more into the black area that I don't really delve into. My expertise is to read their public information and connect the dots.
Okay. Yeah, it's it's especially tough for those of us sitting on the outside trying to see what's going on. And when I see a lot of these public releases, because of my experience with classified information, I just have to wonder how much deeper it goes beyond that. And it's often been said that the black projects are, anywhere from dozens to 100 years ahead of what you see commercially.
Exactly, correct, yes. And that's my experience as well. I typically quote anywhere from, to be conservative, from 30 to 50 years beyond what we are aware of. The tip of the iceberg is the technology we see today. And I find it rather amusing when they come out with these new proclamations of something that they've discovered, knowing that really they're just releasing information that's already obsolete.
And, getting into another field, big data, they collect all this information, and basically they know more about you than you know about you. And I can't even imagine what it's like now. But back in 2004, here in Texas, if you take a defensive driving class, you can get a discount on your auto insurance. And normally we would go do that with the comedy ones, but for some reason we were kind of short on time, so we thought we'd just do it with the online version. And what they would do to make sure that it's you sitting at the computer is every so often they'd pop up a question that, so you'd show that it's you.
Yeah.
And some of those questions was beyond what we knew. Some of them was really disturbing, like they asked my wife, about her siblings. And, that's compared to today, that's nothing. That's kind of like basic information.
Yeah. It would be interesting if they started asking you for, information regarding your DNA. I mean, they really drill down. I had a scientist make the comment to me not long ago that he is aware of black projects, so to speak, just to put an umbrella over it, in which gentlemen will sit with a laptop outside of a congregation, outside of a church, and they will actually take the resonant frequency of each person in the congregation, each person's DNA. And they made the comment, the admonition, that they are not able to break through those that have the Holy Spirit, the true believers. The Christians with the Holy Spirit, they cannot read the frequency of their DNA from a remote location.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it makes you think, okay, how are they monitoring? What sort of detectors do they have? What are they able to read? And we know that they can read our EEG, our brain waves, from a distance. You don't need to go through an MRI. And this is not paranoia. This is how advanced the detectors are, that from a satellite, they can actually detect our brain waves, as well as the frequency, the resonant frequency, the performance of our DNA. And the reason I bring the DNA up in the discussion is the mark of the beast. And in looking at things like DARPA systems, DARPA programs that are put forth to the public sector to implement, many years ago, about 15 years ago, my recollection is that DARPA put out a RFP, a request for proposal, for a private sector to develop DNA that could be controlled through microwaves. And when you start putting more of the pieces together, you realize that the chemtrails, the aerosolized spraying that's going on, has been going on for over 20 years, not only contains barium and strontium and lithium and desiccated blood cells and things like this, but they also contain nanoparticles that are actually what I call the third strand of DNA, artificial DNA that lie dormant within all of us at the present time. And that the mark of the beast process will be literally a flipping of the switch to broadcast microwave signals to the DNA, to the nanoparticles, to begin replicating that third strand.
It's John Reagan with Anthony Patch. We'll be back in a few minutes. John Reagan with Anthony Patch. Just so you know, some of the things we've discussed on the show include DNA and all the brain technology they've been working on and seeing in the newspapers. Some of those are things like, CRISPR, where they go in and edit the DNA. They've developed a third base pair. So in addition to the AT and the CG that we see in our DNA today, they get a third one. So, you can only imagine what kind of monstrosities they could create with that. And then the way that they can, at least with, I don't know if they can do this at a distance yet, but they can do everything from turn you off like a light switch, turn you back on, and you don't even know you were turned off, and manipulation of memories. It's getting to be a world that we just read about in science fiction not too long ago.
Yeah, it's very true. And just to underscore, what we're talking about is information that is all public information. It's in the public sector. It is not difficult to find. So I don't release anything that is coming from concealed sources or from secret contacts or anything of that nature. And nor do I, intend to do something like that. And also, when it is conjecture on my part, I underscore that as well. But you're right. If we can go a little further with the third strand of DNA, basically what we're talking about is DNA that will then essentially take over our conscious thought. You will not even realize that you've been changed. And again, it goes to the discussion or the question of free will. Will we have the opportunity to refuse the mark of the beast? Because I believe this third strand of DNA scenario is the mark of the beast system. And it plugs into the sentient world simulation, it plugs into the quantum computers that operate it. And therefore, in my way of viewing it, the way that I look at this third strand scenario is that, yes, we do have the opportunity to reject the mark of the beast when that situation presents itself. If we take the mark of the beast, then that is when we are subject to that remote switch, so to speak, being thrown. The microwave transmissions from Gwen towers, geosynchronous satellites. Again, pick your situation. To make that even more tangible, there's something that has come out lately from Elon Musk, from Tesla, known as the neural lace, just like our neurons, neural lace. And this is a material, the product name, a trade name of Metrogel, but there's two others out there, but Metrogel is predominant. The neural lace is a material that is injected through hypodermic needle into your jugular and moves through the bloodstream to the brain and overlays our neurons. And then utilizing nano-sized machines, electronic components, it actually attaches to the neurons. And they'll sell it to you as the idea of, reversing or preventing things like Alzheimer's or epilepsy, things like that, that it all sounds well and good. But he presents it as a way to stay a step ahead of the advancements in AI. Elon Musk has said that if we don't stay ahead of AI, we will be rendered as house pets, as he likes to call it. The house cat is the level at which we will operate very soon in terms of the advancement of AI that you referred to. There may be one that's actually out of control at this point. That may be the case. But he started the Hegelian dialect as saying, you need to be afraid of AI. And now he's presenting a way to stay a step ahead of AI. It's all part of this same scenario to get us under control, to be under control of the quantum computer system that is AI.
Well, if this isn't scary enough for Halloween, I'm sure the next hour will get even deeper. This is John Reagan with Anthony Patch. We'll be back after the top of the hour news break. Welcome to the second hour of USA Prepares this Halloween. And I will be back tomorrow. I don't know if Vincent will be there or not. I'm preparing as if he won't be, and if he is, I'll just be happy not to be doing the whole show myself. And just want to make a few comments going in. When we talk about what we see published, and they put out this wonderful application of the technology, I'm looking at it through my military hat and saying, okay, what is the military application of this, which is typically how you break things. And I also tend to get some blowback now and then that this type of stuff can't be kept secret. There's just too many people working on it. Well, if you go back to World War II, there were thousands of people working on the Manhattan Project, and they had that so compartmentalized that nobody really knew what they were working on. And that was so secret that the vice president, Harry Truman, did not know about the Manhattan Project until after FDR died and he assumed the presidency. And in my experience, keep in mind, I was working in the nuclear planning system, above top secret clearance. And a little bit after I left in 1988, I found out about the stealth fighter, the F-117, the same time everybody else did. And that was an aircraft that went on service while I was on active duty. It was part of the delivery system out there, and I didn't know about it. So yeah, they can keep secrets. Anthony, before we get too far down any rabbit holes, why don't you go ahead and give out your website, talk about your books, and any events or projects you have coming up.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that opportunity. The website is Anthony Patch, P-A-T-C-H, anthonypatch.com. And I have 3 books there, 2 of which are novels, Covert Catastrophe. The second is 2048, Diamonds in the Rough. And the third is my latest book, which is a nonfiction work, and that is Revising Reality. And that's a graduate-level university textbook, but it's not difficult to read. It's just that it is more technical. It's a quick read. It's a collaboration between 4 authors, myself, Douglas Woodward, Don Shimura, and Josh Beck. And we've put our relative areas of research into it in the form of 2 chapters apiece. And then what we're doing is asking people to be critical thinkers and examine the education that they've been provided to date and realize through reading this book how much we've been lied to.
And boy, do the lies keep on going and going.
They do. So that's in a nutshell what's going on. There's a lot of information on my website as well. I mentioned the number 2048, and you're talking about compartmentalization and keeping secrets. We should talk about how they encode the cryptology that's involved in maintaining secret communication, because that's the germination. That was one of the, if you will, one of the hurdles that needed to be overcome in the development of the quantum computer by D-Wave. principally Shor's algorithm, Peter Shor's algorithm 2048, which is the foundational algorithm for RSA coding, for encryption. It forms the key for encrypting and decrypting. And their goal early on, a benchmark, was to find the prime numbers, the factors within Peter Shor's algorithm that when he developed it, he admitted that, or stated, it would take a quantum computer to discover or crack the number of prime factors in that algorithm, comprised of 2,048 integers. So they accomplished that with the Model 128 quantum computer with only 128 qubits. At that point, NSA, etc., became very excited. This was originally a DARPA program. $10 million of DARPA money was the foundation of D-Wave. And they realized that once they cracked the 2048 algorithm, that they could read every form of encryption based on RSA on the planet. But the beauty of it was they could write their own code that, unless you had a quantum computer, specifically a D-Wave computer, you could not read that communication. And that was way back with the 128 model. Now with 65,000 plus qubits, they have encryption that no one can read.
I think everybody knows there was a recent attack on the internet, and that's just the old-fashioned brute force attack where they have thousands of devices that are sending packets that just, make it impossible for the target to respond. And it's, like I say, that's even kiddie script type stuff. But recently, they changed the keys at the top level of the internet, and there's 7 of these keys and 14 people total in the world that control these, the true gatekeepers of the internet. So each key has a primary and a backup person in order, and I believe it takes at least 3 of those in that room in order to affect any kind of change. And I got to thinking, well, with these quantum computers, how hard would it be to come up with the keys for the internet and just, do whatever they want?
Yeah, or bypass it entirely and
Right.
utilize your own form of internet. The interesting thing, and one number I can give people that they can grasp is, again, going back in history into 2013, a number that was cited by D-Wave was that if you had a problem, any problem, that it would take the best transistor-based, gate model-based quantum computer 30 minutes to solve a given equation. It would only take the D-Wave computer 10 seconds. Now, that was back in 2013. Essentially, what you're talking about is a machine that can really take any problem and solve it and decrypt any code on the planet that is dependent upon classical computing.
Well, before we, we'll run out of time, I also want to get into the subject of CERN.
Sure.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us some of the things you found out?
Well, CERN is, in its formation in 1954, was primarily organized to model nuclear warhead detonations in the computer. And that was because they realized they weren't going to indefinitely be able to do above ground and below ground testing, and it was more efficient to model it in the computer. So CERN really was the nuclear warhead program. It continues today as a weapons program. But their open public goal, one of their goals in the multi-layered agenda, is to open a doorway to another dimension. And it sounds like it's science fiction stuff, but really, Sergio Bertolini, their head of computing and engineering a few years back, said, we intend to open a portal to another dimension. We're going to send information in, and we expect to get information back, and then that's piggybacked with 40 rows from D-Wave saying they are accessing with their computers other dimensions and grabbing, as he says, grabbing resources, his word, from the other side. You have a quantum computer operating interdimensionally with a particle accelerator facility that intends to open a portal. The two work together because the quantum computer is necessary for guiding the power of the collider to focus in on what they call the north area in the center of the main ring in order to break the nuclear bond, the nuclear force. You have the strong force, weak force, gravity, and electromagnetism. They're going after the strong nuclear force using 20 peta-electron volts, using not only the LHC, but now a new linear accelerator that's physically joined with the LHC called the Awake Linear Accelerator. It's 1,000 times more powerful in its acceleration of particles in a 30-meter distance than the 27-kilometer main ring of the LHC. The two are combined. That will generate the power focused at the north area, controlled by D-Wave quantum computing, to open a portal for a picosecond or less, which is an eternity at the quantum scale, and maintain the opening so that it doesn't become, as Stephen Hawking said, become a vacuum bubble that at the speed of light would envelop the Earth and possibly the universe. So we're talking about controlling this using a quantum computer.
Yeah, and to stop and think, CERN, really just in the last decade or so has made it into the public with the facility over there in Europe. But to think, going back, over 60 years now, it really adds a new dimension, some pun intended, to the picture.
Yeah, I mean, people want to say they're just smashing rocks, but you have to understand that there's a spiritual component that's driving this agenda. And as we pull back and look at it objectively, this is buying into the whole original law, or original lie, I should say, of ye shall be as gods, that you will achieve immortality. That's what all of this is about. Quantum computers, collider, opening portals. The bottom line for them, as practitioners of the Luciferian agenda, is immortality.
This is John Ray with Anthony Patch. We'll be back in a few minutes. This is John Ray with Anthony Patch. And we were talking about CERN, and I wonder if you would cover one of the things you did in your presentation on the location of CERN is no coincidence.
Very true. It is at the ancient Roman temple site to the god Apollo, Abaddon, the destroyer. It is presented as located over the doorway to the abyss. Purposefully located there, not because the real estate was, a good price or a good deal, but because there is no way you can separate the physical from the spiritual. This is a spiritual agenda that is driving the science. In fact, science has its roots in mysticism. And therefore, this is nothing more than, furthering the Luciferian agenda of freeing Nimrod, for example, and the other demonic entities from the abyss, from hell, if you will. And CERN represents not only positioning itself over the doorway to the abyss, but represents the technology that defines the key to the bottomless pit. And the key is actually a combination of what we talked about with the quantum computers, breaking Shor's algorithm 2048. They had to break another code, which was 4096, another algorithm above that. And once they break, and they have, breaking that algorithm, that code of information using 4096, that model number of computer, they're able to determine the power level and the specific location to direct that power from the particle collider to open the doorway to the abyss.
Wow, that just connected a dot for me. Back in during the Gulf War, when Bush said mission accomplished, they had gone in and to the tomb of Gilgamesh and recovered the body.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing the quote that it was an amazing state of preservation. And it was later on I found out that Gilgamesh is just one of the names used for Nimrod.
Yes, sir.
So we have the body with the DNA of Nimrod, which with the technology we have, we can clone a new body. And if we open the abyss and reunite the spirit with the original body,
Yeah.
that gives all sorts of meaning to things that we find written in our Bible.
That is true. This is Nimrod, of course, was responsible for the building of the Tower of Babel, and CERN represents the later day example of the higher tech version of the Tower of Babel, both of which were intended to not only open the doorway to the abyss, but to reach into heaven, to sit upon the throne of heaven. As I like to euphemistically put it, Lucifer, in his hubris, believes that he can kill God and kill God's angels. And he needs the power and the technology to do that. And through the veil, through this information transfer from the other side, both mystically and through the quantum computers of D-Wave, grabbing the resources, as Gordy Rose says, from the other side, this is information that's been denied to us, but is now passed along so that the machinery can be built, which is the Large Hadron Collider and the quantum computers, so that it can further this agenda of Lucifer, because he hates God, believes in his own hubristic mind that he can kill God. But he needs, rather than the spiritual methodology of the days of the Tower of Babel to accomplish that, he needs the hardware to accomplish that.
I was looking at the Bible, and we tend to think, well, Satan would have to be insane to think that he can overcome God. And I look at the interaction that we have, like in Job and the temptation of Jesus. And that's not the way you talk or treat an insane person. So it makes me wonder just, what the real game is. Back in just a few minutes. John Reagan with Anthony Patch. When I look at the Bible and look at the science and technology, the advances that have happened, one over the last few years and two over about the last century, it's really amazing to see that. And there's so many things written in the Bible that we simply could not understand until these times, because we didn't know the science and technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know which frustrates me more, the unbelievers that just think the Bible is a work of fiction, and boy, were they really lucky if that were the case. Or the believers that don't want to consider any of these things. In fact, so many churches out there don't even want to touch something as basic as creationism. And once you start getting into the advanced technology, the Genesis 6 giants, and it's frustrating, because without this additional knowledge, we don't understand what's going on. And one of the things I do is I've presented how we are now in a position, because we've ignored God, that we're going to have a whopper of a financial collapse. And I can't tell you exactly when, but it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
The lessons of history say that after that you have a war, which it's pretty much my belief that the war is unavoidable. And if that's the case, we end up with a grid down situation, which wipes out well over 99% of the population. If somehow we avoid the war, and you have to believe that all countries are controlled, including Russia and China, then we get all this technology thrust upon us, the surveillance and control way beyond what we're experiencing now. And I'm not sure Satan really cares which one of those options it goes, whether he would kill everybody off or control everybody. And it's even talked about in the Bible that, it's going to take divine intervention to get around this. And
Mm-hmm.
it's even, Jesus even said, unless those days are shortened, no flesh would survive. And that's pretty serious times.
Yeah, and the question is often posed to me about CERN specifically is, will Satan be successful? Will CERN be successful in opening this interdimensional portal? Well, we can reference Revelation 9 to see that the abyss is open, and therefore, men's hearts will fail for what they behold. I mean, I'm taking from different scriptures, but essentially, we are talking about things that we can't even imagine, both technologically, but also on the demonic end of it. The locust army, for example. So the bottom line in my presenting the discussion of technology is to show people things that are factual that they can then take to heart and make a decision to go with Christ, to accept Christ as their Savior, accept the Holy Spirit into their heart, and take upon themselves the full armor of God to not only from a physics standpoint, put on the armor of God that protects your DNA, as I discussed with you earlier, but also for the determination of your soul, to save your soul. And if you are a Christian, if you have the Holy Spirit, then use the type of information that you and I present to those that have not been saved, because we are commanded in Scripture by Jesus Christ to save souls. That's the bottom line. That's why we talk about these things. It's evident to hopefully help people make the proper decision.
And I think it's important to do, if you haven't already stepped to the right side, it's important to do that sooner rather than later.
We're not fear-mongering. We're not saying, that the sky is falling, but, they're going to open up the sky. If you want to put an analogy, allegorical reference to it, they're going to roll back like a scroll. So, yeah, the things that are happening very quickly. We know that things happen in a fashion in which they speed up as we move closer and closer to this end-time scenario. And Christ is returning. Christ is coming back. We know that for a fact from Scripture. So, yeah, you can either go to the light or go to the dark, as I like to say it simplistically.
And it really doesn't get any simpler than that. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time together today. What would you like to bring out?
Well, that's really what it is the purpose here is to give hope to people, is to give people the understanding that God is in control of everything. This is His plan. If we talk about the high tech, these are tools of judgment. And judgment, there are consequences to those that have turned their back on Christ. And none of us are perfect. Any of us that are saved know that we're not perfect. That's how we got to the point of salvation, is realizing that we needed to give ourselves over to Christ. So this isn't doom and gloom. This is about, yes, there is judgment coming, and there is suffering that even we as Christians will suffer through. But the bottom line is, where will we go in eternity? And that's the real important point to emphasize here, is that we can be with our Creator, we can be with our Lord, we can be with God in the end.
And that's one of the messages of the Bible that I think sometimes gets twisted, is you will have an eternity. The question is where you will spend it. And if you're, if you haven't accepted Jesus, the alternative is a very nasty eternity. And some people think that it's because, that God is cruel and wants to extract vengeance for for this long period of time, and I'm not really sure that that's the case. Because if when you've got the energy, and even in our physics of today, you can't create or destroy energy. You can only change the form, and right. I'm thinking God kind of has the same issue there, as he can't destroy the energy, but he can't take this perverted energy back to himself. So he's got to keep it separated for an eternity, and that's what hell is. My conjecture.
Yeah, it is. It's the separation from God, and that sense of separation is really what we try to avoid at all costs, because without God, what do you have left? Again, I try to keep things fairly straightforward and simplistic, because I'm not a Bible scholar. I know enough of it to know which direction I want to go. And it's interesting. People get caught up in their everyday life, and I understand that. I'm caught up in mine as well. I have a family, and, we have to put food on the table and all those good things. But we have to keep in mind that we are here for such a short period of time. If we think back over our own lifetimes, the number of people that we grew up with that have now are deceased, that have died, it's like we were here and gone before we knew it. And that's the same thing for us. And that's why the imperative is there, not to waste the time that we have right now, not only to take care of ourselves, but to reach out to others. Start with your family and go out into your circle of influence and try to affect people, because we really don't have much time left from a prophetic standpoint, but even in our own given lifetime, we don't have much time.
And I would recommend going back and reading Matthew 24 if you haven't done so lately, and all of the things that Jesus talks about. It's kind of like sometimes we get accused of doom porn, and he talks about in the first part, about wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, all kinds of things. And at that point he says, and that's the beginning of sorrows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're just getting a taste of it. We can see the leading edge of it right now.
What I talked about in my book, The Financial State of the Union, if your happiness is dependent on the next 50 years being as peaceful and prosperous as the last 50, you're going to be disappointed. And whether your faith is in government or in the fake money or in technology, that faith is going to fail you. And
I agree with that. There is no bringing back the United States to what it was, or the world to what it was. If we want to look at it with, rose-colored glasses with 20/20 hindsight and say that things used to be wonderful, well, they weren't really, but they were better than they are today in terms of the moral situation that we're in. Yeah, we have more advancements in technology, and our standard of living, especially in the United States, is greatly enhanced, more beyond what it was even 20 years ago. But our moral decay and decline is where we're at. And we look at that and wish we had standard of life on a moral level that we had back in the 50s and, yes, even in the 60s. But we don't have that. We're not going to recapture it. It's the way that man has chosen to go, and that is to go on that broad path rather than staying on the narrow path.
I was stationed in Germany from 82 to 85, and I always wondered, how did Germany turn into what we know as, Nazi Germany? And unfortunately, I'm seeing the 30s replay itself with the United States in the role of Germany. It's John Reagan with Anthony Patch. We'll be back after this break. It's John Reagan at the controls today. We have Anthony Patch with us. His website is anthonypatch.com. And how appropriate was that commercial with L.A. Marzulli? And I really hope that he is able to get Nephilim made into a movie.
Yes, in fact, L.A. will be joining Richie from Boston. That's the YouTube channel. Richie from Boston and I collaborate 2 to 3 times a week. We get together and have a conversation. And L.A., as you know, was a presenter at the Hear the Watchman conference in Knoxville a few weeks ago. L.A. is a great friend of mine. He will be on with myself and Richie 2 Sundays from yesterday. I don't have the date in front of me, but there'll be notices on my website. L.A. will be presenting his latest information. He just returned from Peru. So, yeah, he and I are walking hand in hand in our research and combining our notes. L.A. is a fantastic, real guy. He's not all about hype and fluff and, sensational headlines.
Yeah, I got to see him for the first time at the Prophecy Summit in Branson in 2012. And, it's like, if you'd made a bet before the conference, what's the last thing you expect to hear at the Prophecy Summit? And they say, well, how about Nazi flying saucers? And I'd say, you're nuts. But LA did a presentation and learning about the occult nature of World War II and what the Nazis were after was so eye-opening.
Yes, indeed. And I was stationed in Germany as well. You mentioned that before the break. I was there from 77 to 79 and was hanging around nuclear warheads at the time. So, yeah, I understand about the Cold War.
And it was interesting to see so much of history, because here in the United States, while we had people that in our families that served in World War I and World War II, to actually go and see some of the things, like we got to tour one of the cemeteries in France, and just to see the pile of bones and skulls inside this one building was mind-boggling on one hand, and just so soul-sucking on the other, to see what war was like. And we didn't experience that over here because of geography. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, with the technology today, while we might not see an invasion of troops, the destruction that can be meted out on our country is quite realistic and can happen much quicker than anybody can believe.
Yes, whether we're talking EMP or direct nuclear strike upon this country, it's a reality. It's something that we have to deal with. But I do want to leave people with this thought, and I always try to underscore this, that God does have a sense of humor. He balances out my personal testimony. He balances out these sort of doom and gloom things that I am researching with his sense of humor, and I call it a British sense of humor, a dry sense of humor is how he appeals to me. It gives me the ability to see the folly of Satan's agenda, and we know from Scripture that ultimately Satan loses in this whole scenario.
Yeah, and I check out that God has a sense of humor just by going and looking in the mirror.
That's for sure. That's for sure. It keeps us humble.
Another thing I learned at the Prophecy Summit, and this was, I don't remember who presented this, but he talked about the fallen angels, and in his estimation, they have an IQ of about 2,000, and the best human is 200. So if you think that you can outthink them, you're only fooling yourself. And that gets into the AIs, and unfortunately, we're out of time. Anthony, thank you for being with us.
I appreciate the time. Thank you for the opportunity, John. It's been a pleasure.
Remember, class, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.